Hello and welcome everybody to the Rocha Revolution here on Substack. We have another great episode this week, and I am honored to be joined by my good friend, Dr. Raul Ruiz. Let's get something out of the way right now, Doctor. For folks who don't know you, you're a doctor, but you're also a congressman. If somebody walks up to you, and I know you're going to say, "Oh, I'm just Raul," but we need to know proper protocol. Do folks call you Dr. Ruiz or Congressman Ruiz?
Either or. I think most folks nowadays are calling me congressman, but people still call me doctor, and still people call me Raul. So it just depends on when you knew me first.
That's right. Well, I think I might have I know you when you were first running when you were Dr. Ruiz. So I've known you both. For this conversation, since we are good friends, I am going to call you Raul, since we are one of my good personal friends. Look, I think that my goal for this episode was I wanted you to be a part of this because I want all of the Rocha Revolution listeners to know who you are because you are doing some of the best work out there. But before we talk about that work, introduce yourself to my audience and tell folks how you got to Congress because we just talked about you being a doctor before you were ever a congressman.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Chuck. And hello to all the Rocha revolutionists out there that
There we
continue
go.
to follow and gain the wisdom and the actions, energies from my good friend Chuck. But look, I never had running for Congress in my vision, in my goals, my plans, etc. I started in a farm worker trailer park in the eastern Coachella Valley, in the actual city of Coachella. And both my parents didn't finish high school. They worked very hard out in the fields. My dad was a mechanic. My mother worked in the fields, stacking the boxes and the grape fields until they got married and had my older brother. Then she stayed at home. And it wasn't until I was about 4 years old, my dad was promoted to work from the as a mechanic in the fields into a packing house, where we were able to move out of our trailer and into our home in the barrio of Coachella. And my older brother was the first to graduate from high school. I followed, and I had a dream since I was 4 years old to be a doctor and come home. It was very, interesting story. My mother one day asked me what all moms ask their kids, in Spanish, "Mijo, ¿qué quieres hacer cuando creces?" And so I remember looking at her and thinking to myself, man, my mother does a good job taking care of other people. Um, she's the angel in the community who would give the shirt off her back. She would feed our neighbors. She would always volunteer at the churches and stuff. And so I asked, well, Mom, what do you call others, that people who help others like you? And she was very smart. She said, "Doctor, mijo,"
Ah,
doctor. So she planted the seed in my head, and since then I wanted to be a doctor. So I finished, at CV High School, Coachella Valley High School. Went pre med at UCLA. Got accepted to Harvard Medical School. Did a joint degree program with the Kennedy School with a master's in public policy. Did a year of general surgery, internship, a year of research, 3 years of emergency medicine training, actually at the Pit. A lot of people are watching the Pit series. I actually trained there.
so you were in
And
Pittsburgh at the
I was in
hospital?
Pittsburgh. Yep, at the hospital, at Presbyterian Hospital, the whole residency program where the Pit is based out of.
Wow.
And so I did that whole residency program, then went back to Boston to do a international emergency medicine fellowship with a Harvard Humanitarian Initiative focusing on humanitarian disaster aid, where I worked my weekends, received a master's in public health, and did some international consulting for Serbia and El Salvador. And then when I finished that, I came back home to work in a hospital here, a nonprofit hospital called Eisenhower Health. And so just from there, I started a mentorship program for kids in farm worker communities who wanted to be doctors. I helped start a free clinic. I just did a lot of community organizing and activism, and decided to run for office because the congresswoman was voting to cut Pell Grants, to privatize Medicare, cut Medicaid or the Medi-Cal program in California, and voting in ways that hurt the communities that I was working in serving as a physician and a community organizer. And my father taught me as a kid, instead of complaining or whining, just do something about it. And so I said, I'm going to run for office. And people were like, "Well, who the hell are you?" Uh,
Now we're gonna get to that.
yeah,
I want to hold that because I think that's a whole separate story that folks that follow this program are political animals like me and you. Before we talk about that first race, which we're going to get to, I want
yeah.
to tell another story before that, and that is this district is so unique, and the doctor, Congressman Ruiz, represents an iteration of a district that's moved around and recently just moved again with redistricting, but it's also had two things in common throughout its history, and that's what I want you to talk about before the race, is explaining to people the area that you represent. Folks don't realize that this Coachella Valley and these places around Palm Springs and now even part of other places of LA County represent some of the poorest and some of the wealthiest parts of California. Tell folks about the district that you represent before we talk about that first race.
Well, the first district that I represented, California 36, had the entire Coachella Valley, and we have some severe levels of poverty and high unemployment in unincorporated areas where there's a lot of farm workers, people still living in shanty towns with arsenic in their water, not great sanitation services, etc. And that's juxtaposed about 30-minute drive to some of the wealthiest areas in the United States. The city of Indian Wells is probably in the top three richest city per capita in the whole US. I mean, this is where people have their fourth homes uh, and gated communities. And so I grew up in the east side in the poor areas, the poor neighborhoods that had all the issues of poverty. I experienced there's a lot of gangs in my area, my community, my neighborhood. I'd learned how to become very street smart, and what we say in Spanish, trucha, which is which is situational awareness. To have trucha is to have situational awareness of your surroundings, of where you're at.
Where I
Uh,
grew up, we called that having your head on a swivel,
yeah,
always kind of looking.
yeah, yeah. And so, you just grow up with that kind of street smart. And so it's a dichotomy of worlds. And before, the political establishment was always supporting individuals who would only attend the country club meetings that had strong financial support. Then here comes a professional, a doctor from the East Side with street credit, as well as an educational resume that was working in the communities at the grassroots level to really help people. And so we just flipped it because for the first time, a Latino has represented an area where Latinos are growing population, I think, and that district in the Coachella Valley, it's about 45% of the population.
So the first time you ran, the district, and again, it's changed, but the first time you ran, it was still a majority white district, but Latinos were a big part of it, probably 45% of the population, and then probably what, 35% of the voters?
Less, about
Okay,
28%.
cool. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we really built a coalition. And we have a very strong LGBTQ political powerhouse community in Palm Springs. You have Latinos in the East Side. You have a big senior population. And so, I built a coalition that has never been brought together previously, had never been brought together, and we focused on Medicare and protecting Medicare and healthcare access, and that was a winning combination for us. Now, the current district took out all those affluent cities, Indian Wells, Palm Springs, Rancho Mirage, Palm Desert, La Quinta, and included all of the Imperial County, all the different cities in the Imperial County. And so now I represent a more homogenous, impoverished district. It's one of the most impoverished districts in terms of household income, and with one of the highest unemployment rates in the whole state of California, and practically in the nation as well. Which, when I had the choice of whether running in a more affluent or the more impoverished district, of course, it was the no brainer for me. I'm running in my home community area to represent that area and the causes that made me want to be a doctor, made me want to fight for the people, made me want to run for Congress to begin with. And so I am very proud to represent the California's 25th district. That's going to change after Prop 50. Some of the cities in the periphery have been removed, and I'm gaining. It's going to include now three of those affluent cities, which are La Quinta, Palm Desert, and Rancho Mirage in the Coachella Valley. So I'll have all of the Coachella Valley except for Palm Springs and Indian Wells.
So let's talk about this. And there's been a lot of things in the ways that me and you have come to know each other that are parallels. I think, my mom was only 15 when she got pregnant with me. She had me when she was 16, and I grew up in a trailer house, and many of those times in a trailer park across the street from my grandmother's house. And it's different times in my life. I've lived all around that little piece of 30 acres that my grandparents owned, my mother's people, in a really poor area. And I understood what government assistance was because I didn't know it was government cheese back then. I just knew it made the best grilled cheese sandwiches. And I think a lot of those are the same things that me and you've talked about, hence why we do a lot of work together now. For folks that are listening to this, how does, and I'm going to call you a kid because you were a young man then, this young man come back to his community, start working as a doctor. You'd never run for city council. You'd never run for state rep. A lot of young Latinos, folks are said, you got to start at the bottom. You got to run for some local office. You, because I know you, but I laugh now because I know you really well, would just have the gall to run for Congress in a district that back then was an R plus a couple against a widow of, and you should tell this story, a widow of the former Republican, a Republican icon in this area, some would say. First, describe who she was and how she got the job, and then also how you put together the coalition of poor Latino working class, old white liberals who really cared about Social Security and Medicaid, and this gay activist community in Palm Springs to actually cobble together a winning formula there.
Well, so I beat Mary Bono Mack, who's the widow of Sonny Bono.
Sonny Bono, who was married to Cher, for all of you at home.
Yes, that's Sonny Bono.
That's Sonny Bono.
And he was the mayor of Palm Springs. So the airport's named, has a whole wing which is named after him. He's a pretty historic figure for the Palm Springs area. And the area had been represented by a Republican, I think, for over 40 years. When I ran, it was 6% more registered Republicans than Democrats. So it was an R+6. And so when I decided to run after thinking it through, it wasn't a calculated, strategic, looking at the numbers, seeing how I can win. It was all heart and gut, man. I was just angry at the way she was voting. She was hurting my patients. She was hurting the students I was mentoring. She never once stepped in the poor communities that I grew up in. She actually laughed at a DJ's joke calling my hometown a third world toilet, and said, ha, 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 that's so funny. Disrespecting her own constituents who live there, like my family. And so I ran just pure passion and guts. And in fact, a lot of people said, there's no way on earth that you would win. A lot of Democrats here said, if we thought anybody could win, I would run. They would tell me, these Democrats, right? And then some even got offended. Like, they would literally tell me, who the hell do you think you are? Like, why don't you wait your turn in line? Run for school board, run for city council, run for the state like the rest of us are. Like who do you think you are just running for Congress? and I looked at him because I had sweat, blood, tears, working to serve my patients and working to serve the poor in the community, doing free health clinics at trailer parks, starting mentorship programs for kids of farm workers who wanted to be doctors, putting my own resources in every single free time I had, meaning every single day I did not work a shift in the ER, I was out organizing. I was out there with people working grassroots and bringing in resources to develop clinics and initiatives and plans and programs. And so when these politicians would tell me, who the hell do you think you are? I just looked at them and I said, with all due respect, I don't have to ask permission to serve the community. So I ran anyway. And then when we got a pollster from Sacramento who came down to really counsel me on the numbers, he didn't even have the decency of coming into my district. I had to drive to Los Angeles, about 2.5 hour away, to meet with him in a hotel. And he looked at this book and he says, look, Jerry Brown lost in your district. Senator Feinstein lost in your district. Senator Boxer lost in your district. The last candidate lost by nearly double digits. I think it was like 9.8 or some percent. He says, I have to be honest with you. He says, you have a 5% chance of winning. And I swear I looked at him and I said, so you mean I can win? I said, so you're telling me that I have a chance. I can actually win this thing. And so we went back and we ran a very strategic campaign, and we turned a 5% chance of winning into a 6% victory. And it wasn't, this coalition that I built wasn't like, oh, we have to do XYZ to really build the campaign to get the numbers because we targeted. I didn't know any of that stuff. Like I never ran for office before. I never held office before. I hired people who knew what they were doing, and I just knew that I needed to work like I always have, work my ass off. And so before I even decided to run, I was organizing with some of the LGBTQ leaders to educate the communities throughout the Coachella Valley on HIV, the stigma on that. I was working to do flu vaccine campaigns after the H1N1 pandemic in the most high risk locations, the senior homes and residents, and senior centers throughout the Coachella Valley. So taking the vaccine into the community. That's where I brought my experience and expertise during the COVID pandemic. And then, so it was just a natural, where at the time, the person who ran against Mary Bono was the gay mayor of Palm Springs, who was married and had kids. So because he was gay, I think he kind of tiptoed around the issue. But I came out very early saying I will bleed for the cause of equality because it is a cause that many straight individuals have bled for, to create our rightful equal space in our communities, whether you're Black, Indigenous, Brown. And so it's all part of the same movements, all part of the same understanding of what it feels like to be discriminated against, either because you're poor, you don't dress with the nice clothes, whether your first language was a different language, the color of your skin, or who you love. And so I built those friendships along the way. So when I said I'm running, they were all on board, and true to my word, I've been there lockstep with them.
And that's, I think, a reflection of what we talk about today when we're like, who we elect matters. And there's lots of rich people that have the privilege to run, and they have lots of resources, and they can take off work if they have a job. They're probably living off their stocks. Like, there's very few regular folks who get an opportunity to run, more or less, or nonetheless, even have a chance to win. Like, oh, you're telling me I've got a chance? Well, why not? So this is why And I think the doctor, the congressman, is a reflection of what it means when you elect regular folks, because they're going to fight for regular folks, which leads me to the issue set of questions. Like, obviously, you're a doctor and you're in Congress. You know a lot about healthcare, not because you've read that in a policy book, it's because you've dealt with the healthcare system, whether you were in an emergency room, whether you were in a clinic, whether you were giving the actual shots to vaccinate people. Uh, and then we live in a time when you first ran, there was no Donald Trump on any ballot. Now, Donald Trump has unended what we've thought of norms around lots of things, whether it's armed, masked ICE agents in our street, or him working with the Republican Congress to try to pass a big, beautiful bill, as what they would call, that you would call a bill that you voted against, that cuts Medicaid for folks who need it in your community.
Yeah.
Where are you at right now on what you think are the issues that are the most important to your district that you're fighting for every day because you see the impact in Congress?
Well, first, and you've talked about this before. Donald Trump came in, sold people a bunch of a bag of goods of just nonsense of
You can
how
cuss here. He gave us a bunch of bullshit, but go ahead.
yeah, about lowering costs and going after only criminals that were immigrants and all these things he was going to do on day one. And people didn't understand why a lot of shift happened in minority communities, Latinos, African Americans, etc. It's not hard to understand that those that are working class poor, like my families, who do 2 jobs, 3 jobs, don't have benefits, are still barely making it, when there's the rising cost of living, it impacts them more than it does somebody who's more affluent that has a little something saved up that can tolerate some price increases. So the number one issue still remains the cost of living and affordability. And so we're working tirelessly to fight back on all these policies that Republicans have just passed through Congress that raise costs. And I'll get to some of those. And we also are fighting to expand and protect healthcare and to lower the cost of healthcare. And currently, right now, I'm fighting to help prevent death and protect human dignity for individuals, the non-criminal immigrants who have been detained by ICE in these detention centers, having experienced one of the most deadliest or the deadliest year in over 20 years of people dying in ICE and CBP custody act. So the biggest crisis right now was created by the Trump administration and the Republicans. The Trump tariff tax on the American people has increased the cost of groceries, the cost of energy, the cost of goods, and people are paying for that throughout their week. Uh, the big ugly law, the so-called big beautiful bill, cuts Medicaid by nearly $1 trillion. What is that going to do? That's going to leave 15 million people uninsured. Those people are going to have a healthcare crisis. In addition to that, they're going to be uncompensated care in local emergency departments. The hospitals are going to need to compensate for that care, so they're going to charge the insurance companies during the negotiations more money. So insurance companies, in order to pay for that, are going to increase premiums. Don't take my word for it. I had 7 CEOs sitting across from me, and I asked every single one that scenario, and if they were going to, and they led me through that scenario because I was leading them to that. They all said that they were going to increase premiums because of the uninsured population caused by the Medicaid cuts. That means it's not just a person who's on Medicaid problem, it's an everybody problem. Workers are going to face increasing premiums. Those businesses are going to then transfer those costs. The people on private health insurance are going to be paying a disproportionate increase in the premiums, and we've seen it. They're preparing for the devastation that these Medicaid cuts are going to happen. To add insult to injury, the same individuals who tend to be on the Medicaid program are also on food support, nutritional support. So when you take away their nutritional support that helps keep them healthy to get the nutrients that they need, you take away their access to physicians when they have chronic illnesses or that they need care. When this bill cuts over $600 billion to hospital revenue, where do you think people are going to go if they get sick? I mean, I'm just already getting so pissed off. When you have individuals who, these hospitals that are barely making it, their profit margins are just barely enough to pay their staff. The first thing that goes is pediatrics or labor and delivery or mental health services. If after they cut all those different services, mind you, for everybody, even people with private health insurance, they cut those services in a community, the next thing that goes is the hospital, the emergency department. Without an emergency department, you have no hospital. They close. It's estimated 20% of hospitals are going to close because of this. So if you live in an area and you don't have health insurance or you don't have a hospital, even if you have insurance or not, if you have a cardiac arrest, a heart attack, or a stroke, if you don't have an emergency department to get to within a certain time frame, your chances of permanent injury or dying have just gone up because of this bill. And the people, the working poor, the working uh, 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 class are going to feel it the hardest. So this is the healthcare cost crisis that we're dealing with. And then with the expiration of the Affordable Care Act tax credits that they so adamantly refused to extend, I have individuals who are in that middle class zone. I don't qualify for anything, but I can't afford it. Well, they just got screwed because now they're paying 18,000 more a year for their health insurance. Who the hell is going to afford that on
Right.
top of the increasing costs of living for families? So that's what we're focusing on. The other big thing you mentioned, ICE. Uh, it's atrocious that the president gave ICE uh, $75 billion, more than the Department of Defense for the country of Italy and some other countries put together, uh, in order to carry out his campaign of terror in a very targeted area in blue cities and blue states, and the violence and the brutality against non-criminal immigrants, against United States citizens, violating all kinds of due process rights, is an abomination. It needs to end. And that's why I voted no to fund the Department of Homeland Security. There are certain provisions that we need to put in there. We need to divest. We need to restructure so that they aren't capable of the brutality and the violence that they're causing on our own American citizens. And so, in addition to that, I've introduced the humanitarian standards for individuals in ICE and CBP Custody Act. This originated in the first Trump administration when you had kids dying under the custody of CBP. And so I traced the path and spoke to the paramedics, the techs that are at those CBP stations in New Mexico and others, and developed the bill focusing on CBP. But given the current intentional brutality and violence and the deaths that we're seeing within ICE and the ICE contracted detention centers, I expanded it to include ICE. And so what this does is it basically, using my medical background, public health background, humanitarian background, and looked at different sources, international sources, U.S. sources, penitentiary standards, et cetera, to identify a health screening protocol, guidelines, standards that will help identify emergencies, get people treated quickly to prevent death, and provide some basic necessities to protect human dignity, like the amount of water per individual, the amount of calories people should be consuming per day, the conditions to be able to sleep, because people have been reporting not enough food, age appropriate food. People, have reported giving babies frozen burritos, hygienic products, feminine hygienic products, or the ability to go to a hand washing station without any barriers, the ability to shower, the ability to have a fresh pair of clothes. I mean, these are public health measures that help people retain their decency and their dignity. Having enough toilets where you can use in private. I mean, you have places now where you have multiple people in a prison-like cell with an open toilet, and there's no privacy. And so you have conditions where people are only allowed to go outside and get sunlight for at most 2 hours a day. And you have conditions where, in some ICE facilities like Adelanto that I visited, where their lights are off at 11, lights on at 4, 5 hours of darkness where they can potentially sleep. So this is a bill that would provide some standards to help prevent death and to protect the human dignity. But ultimately, uh, people who are undergoing a civil case in a civil court should not be held against their will in a prison like facility. So, non criminal immigrants should not be prisoners of our country, and United States citizens should not be brutalized, and these immigrants should not be brutalized in such a violent way where we have two deaths with Renee Good and Alex Peretti dying because they were out there observing and practicing their First Amendment rights.
I think what you just explained is why we need more trailer park kids in Congress, because folks get to see Congress people on TV every day on CNN and on MSNBC or Fox News. It don't matter if you're Democrat or Republican. Having a connection to real people makes you a better public service. And I've always thought it makes you and a handful of other Congress folks who actually are regular folks better at your job, not because of whatever the degree is or wherever you've done your public service or your education. That helps and informs. But it's remembering the pain that you sympathize with because you remember that pain.
Oh yeah.
As a political consultant, when I write an ad, it's not because of what the poll told me. The poll can lead me somewhere, but it's remembering the way I felt when I couldn't make my electric payment this month or when I had to pay half of it. And those things come back and remind all of us. And I think that gets me to the last question, because I want to respect your time today, is that there's a lot of kids that grew up in the trailer park that I was in. There was a lot of folks who grew up in the trailer parks that you were in. There's still a lot of folks and kids who don't know that the possibility of living the American dream because what they're seeing with ICE or what they're seeing in their schools terrorizes them, as it should. But as you give advice to young people, because you were that kid, I was that kid. I didn't have somebody like you back then when I was a kid to look towards or to give me that advice. I just lucked into being at the right place at the right time lots of times. And as people listen to this, what is the advice when you go to schools now and high schools and other places? What do you tell these kids?
Well, the first thing is you gotta, there's got to be something that you feel inside that sparks that energy that's indescribable. That energy that it's like a calling, it's a purpose. And so the first thing is to really dig deep and identify what your purpose is on earth. What do you care about? What injustice do you want to right? What wrong do you want to correct? What future do you want to build? What value do you want to give that has that noble value that you believe in, right?
Right.
Find that, pursue that with everything you got, and don't wait for somebody to hand you an opportunity. Don't wait for it. You have to create it. You have to hustle. You have to make it happen. And then pursue it like your life depends on it, because who you are depends on that. Mine was to fight injustice and to take care of the pain and suffering of individuals who, because of those injustices, because of poverty, because of difficulties in where they live, their zip code, or not having the adequate health insurance, suffered through health and the inability to get health care. That was my purpose here, is to serve others to relieve that pain, suffering, to co-create those opportunities for them to live their best lives, to have those opportunities, to have the ability to have the job that gives them meaning, that they then can enjoy their lives and help and contribute to the community. When I ran, our motto was reviving the American dream. You know, we had the EKG line because it was like it was dying and we were resuscitating it. And but we need to change the definition. It's not, the American dream isn't just hustling, working hard, playing by the rules, and creating material wealth for you. You know, the house, the white picket fence, the dog, the BMW, whatever. No, that's not what it's about. It's about the contributions that you empower yourself through hard work and an education in order to empower others, so that when you get that education, you work hard, you bring your whole community, you bring your clan, you bring your pack, your wolf pack up with you to help. I remember my mother one time, wrote me a letter because one minute I was studying medicine, and then I told her I was going to go to government school, and she's like, "Why? Your dream is to be a doctor." And then the next minute, I'm out in the jungles of Chiapas serving the Mayans and the poor in the late '90s, during the Zapatista movement, and she's like, "What are you doing there?" And I said, "Mom, until you realize that I am working hard so that I can serve people that someday in some shape or form I will never meet, the poorest of the poor, those that suffer the most injustice. That's what I'm doing here. Is I'm in training to develop my MD, my public health, my public policy, my leadership, so that I can make the biggest impact for at a local level and national and international, to help save lives, reduce the pain and suffering of people, and allow people the opportunity to grow." And so creating that opportunity, not waiting for it to start, is number one. Let me give you a story of what the Coachella Hustle is and what I tell my team of how to use the Coachella Hustle. So I was a medical student in Boston. I rarely had the time to come home and visit family. I always, because I didn't have the money. I had no rich family members to pay for my airfares to come home. But this time I was able to finagle a scholarship to go to a conference. It happened around Halloween. I went home. Kids were trick or treating. I was at my mom's house. We're in the barrio. So all these kids would knock on the door. One kid's like, "Trick or treat." I gave him a candy. He's like, "Hey, can I have one for my brother?" I said, "Yeah." "Can I have one for my sister?" I said, "Yeah." Then he goes to his tios and his tias and his primo this and prima that. And then finally he's like, "Hey, can I have one for my grandma?" I said, "Get out of here. Your grandma probably has diabetes. Don't, like, get out of here." So I gave him a lot of candy, and I'm like, wow, the nerve of this kid, right? So then the next day I'm putting the decorations away and I'm cleaning up the house, and I hear a door knock, and I open the door, and there's this kid, the same kid. He's holding up a bag of candy. This is in the body of Coachella, holding up a bag of candy. He's like, "Hey, mister, you want to buy a candy?" I was like, "You know what? How much are you selling this bag for?" He's like, $8. He's like, "Here, look, I'm going to give you $8. I'm very impressed. When you turn 16, 18, you come look for me. I want to hire you." But that's creating opportunity, right? That's the Coachella Hustle. That's when you live in poor communities and you're hungry to make a difference, to empower yourselves, to help empower others. Then you're going to do what it takes without permission, without asking permission, to fight for your community, for fight for the right causes, and you're going to make it happen. And so that's the trajectory of my life. And now I'm in a position where I can fight and co-create those opportunities with the communities that I serve, my patients, and the area that I grew up in, for our country.
Congressman, thank you so much for taking the time today, and thanks for your team for letting me take so much of your time. If you want to support the congressman, go to drraulruiz.com. You can give a donation there. You can support his campaign. You can follow him on his social media handles. Please, Dr. Congressman, give your wife my best. Kiss the twins for me, and I can't wait to see y'all soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chuck.
Y'all be good out there. We'll see you next week, everybody.